in the fog-choked shadows of 1897 London, a chilling telegram summoned Sherlock Holmes to Abbey Grange, where Sir Eustace Brackenstall lies dead, his skull shattered in a grand dining room. Was it a brutal burglary gone wrong, as the terrified Lady Brackenstall claims, or does the half-filled wine glass and a hidden brass key whisper a darker truth? As Holmes unravels a web of lies, a scarred sailor from a distant past emerges, his love for a tormented woman sparking a deadly clash. But when the truth of that fatal night is laid bare, will Holmes deliver a killer to justice, or defy the law to shield a secret that could destroy them all? Chapter 1. The Summons to Abbey Grange. The fog clung to London like a jealous lover, wrapping Baker Street in a shroud of damp, yellow-grey mist that muffled the clatter of hooves and the distant cries of newsboys. It was a morning in the winter of 1897, and I, Dr. John Watson, sat at the breakfast table in our familiar lodgings, nursing a cup of tea and glancing at the untouched plate of kippers before me. Across the room, Sherlock Holmes lounged in his armchair by the fire, his lean frame draped in a dressing gown, his sharp eyes fixed on some invisible point beyond the hearth. His fingers, long and restless, toyed with the stem of an unlit pipe, a sure sign that his mind was already racing ahead of the day's mundane concerns. The silence, heavy with the weight of London's gloom, was broken by the sharp rap of Mrs. Hudson's knock, followed by her brisk entrance with a silver salver bearing a telegram. "For you, Mr. Holmes," she said, her tone carrying that faint exasperation reserved for his eccentricities. Holmes seized the telegram with a swiftness that belied his languid pose, tearing it open with a flick of his wrist. His eyes scanned the message, and a spark of interest flared in their depths. "From Inspector Stanley Hopkins," he announced, his voice crisp with anticipation. "He summons us to Abbey Grange, near Chislehurst, in Kent. A murder, Watson, Sir Eustace Brackenstall, found dead in his own dining room. The circumstances," Hopkins writes, "are most perplexing. He begs our immediate assistance." He rose, tossing the telegram onto the table. "Pack your bag, my dear fellow. We must catch the next train. A case like this promises to lift the fog from our minds, if not from London's streets." I needed no further urging. The prospect of a new mystery, coupled with Holmes' infectious energy, dispelled my morning lethargy. Within the hour, we were aboard a train, the rhythmic clatter of wheels carrying us through the frost-dusted fields of Kent. Holmes sat opposite me, his ulster buttoned against the chill, his gaze fixed on the passing landscape, though I knew his thoughts were elsewhere, piecing together fragments of a puzzle not yet fully revealed. I respected his silence, content to watch the skeletal trees and frozen hedgerows slide past, their outlines softened by the persistent mist. Abbey Grange stood at the end of a winding drive, its grey stone facade looming through the haze like a sentinel of some forgotten era. Its gables, half hidden by ivy, gave it an air of melancholy grandeur, as though the house itself mourned the tragedy within. Inspector Stanley Hopkins awaited us at the entrance, his youthful face drawn with fatigue and unease. He was a man I had come to admire for his dogged determination, though he lacked the spark of genius that set Holmes apart. His dark overcoat was dusted with frost, and his breath clouded in the cold air as he greeted us. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, I'm grateful. You've come," he said, shaking our hands with a grip that betrayed his anxiety. "It's a grim affair. Sir Eustace Brackenstall was found this morning, his skull shattered in the dining room. We suspect burglars, 3 of them, by the look of things. They made off with some silver, but not before tying up Lady Brackenstall and her maid. The women are shaken but unharmed. Holmes' eyes narrowed, his mind already sifting through the inspector's words. "Show us the scene at once," he said, his tone clipped, "and tell me everything, every detail, however trivial it seems." We followed Hopkins into the house, passing through a hall adorned with hunting trophies and faded tapestries. The air was heavy with the scent of old wood and wax polish, tinged with something sharper fear, perhaps, or the lingering echo of violence. As we approached the dining room, I felt a prickle of unease, the kind that comes when one steps into a place where death has left its mark. Holmes, however, strode forward with the keen alertness of a hound on the scent, his every sense attuned to the mystery awaiting us. Chapter 2. The scene of the crime, the dining room of Abbey Grange, was a cavernous chamber, its high ceiling lost in shadow and its oak-panelled walls gleaming dully in the flicker of gaslight. A long mahogany table dominated the space, its polished surface marred by a scatter of objects that hinted at the violence that had unfolded. At the far end, beneath a stern portrait of some long-dead Brackenstall, lay the body of Sir Eustace, sprawled in an ungainly heap, his face frozen in a rictus of shock, bore the unmistakable mark of a brutal ender-deep gash across his temple. The blood congealed in a dark pool beneath his head. Beside him, glinting malevolently in the dim light, lay a heavy iron poker, its tip stained with the grim evidence of its use. Sherlock Holmes stepped into the room with the quiet precision of a man entirely in his element, his sharp eyes darting from floor to ceiling, absorbing every detail. Inspector Stanley Hopkins hovered at his elbow, his voice low as he recounted the morning's discovery. "The butler found him just after dawn," he said, gesturing toward the body. "Lady Brackenstall and her maid, Teresa, were in here when it happened, or so they claim. They were bound with rope over there, by the hearth." He pointed to a coil of coarse hemp lying discarded near a massive stone fireplace, its embers long cold. Holmes knelt beside Sir Eustace, his long fingers probing the air above the wound, as though measuring the force of the blow. "A single strike," he murmured, almost to himself, delivered with considerable strength. "The angle suggests a tall man, right-handed, and standing close." He produced his lens and examined the poker, noting the blood's distribution along its length. "Curious," he said, rising. "The weapon was not wiped, yet it was left behind. A careless oversight for a burglar, would you not say, Hopkins?" The inspector frowned, his confidence wavering. "I suppose so, Mr. Holmes. But they were in a hurry, took some silver candlesticks and a tray from the sideboard, and fled through that window." He indicated a tall casement window, its latch bent and the pane slightly ajar, admitting a chill draught that stirred the heavy velvet curtains. Holmes crossed to the window, his movements swift yet deliberate. He ran his fingers along the latch, his brow furrowing. "Forced, yes, but the marks are peculiar. The damage is too clean, too precise for a hasty break-in." He pushed the window open and leaned out, studying the sill and the ground beyond. "The earth is soft from last night's rain, yet there are no footprints, no trace of entry or escape." He turned back to the room, his gaze falling on the table, where 3 crystal wine glasses stood in a neat row, one still half filled with a ruby-red liquid. A decanter, its stopper carelessly removed, sat nearby. "3 glasses," Holmes said, his voice sharp with interest. "Yet Lady Brackenstall and her maid were alone when the intruders entered, were they not?" Hopkins nodded, though his expression betrayed uncertainty. That's what they said. Perhaps Sir Eustace had been drinking earlier, before he retired. Perhaps Holmes replied, but his tone suggested doubt. He picked up the half-filled glass, holding it to the light. No fingerprints, no smudges. The wine is untouched, as though poured for effect. He set it down and moved to the rope, lifting it with the tip of his cane, and this, loosely knotted, barely tight enough to restrain. It's almost as if the binding was an afterthought, a stage prop. I watched him, fascinated by the way his mind wove these disparate threads into a pattern only he could see. "What are you suggesting, Holmes?" I asked. He did not answer at once. His attention now on a small brass candlestick on the mantel, slightly askew, as though nudged out of place. He tilted his head, his eyes narrowing. "Something is amiss here, Watson. The scene is too perfect to arrange. Burglars do not leave such tidy clues, nor do they pause to pour wine." He turned to Hopkins. "I must speak with Lady Brackenstall at once. Her account will be illuminating." As we left the room, I glanced back at the silent figure of Sir Eustace, his lifeless eyes staring into the void. The dining room, with its polished surfaces and grim tableau, seemed to hold its breath, guarding secrets that only Holmes could unravel. In that moment, I felt the familiar thrill of a mystery deepening, its shadows stretching far beyond the walls of Abbey Grange. Chapter 3. The Lady's Tale. The upper floors of Abbey Grange were as solemn as the tragedy below, their corridors lined with portraits whose eyes seemed to follow us with silent reproach. Lady Brackenstall received us in her private sitting room, a delicate space adorned with pale silk wallpaper and a single window overlooking the mist-shrouded gardens. She sat upon a chaise longue, her slender frame draped in a morning gown of black crepe, her golden hair pinned loosely as though grief had robbed her of the will to attend to such vanities. Her eyes, red-rimmed and shadowed, betrayed a sleepless night. Yet there was a curious composure in her bearing, a stillness that seemed to hold more than sorrow. Beside her stood Teresa, her maid, a gaunt woman with a face like weathered stone, her hands clasped tightly before her. Sherlock Holmes took the chair opposite, his lean figure settling with a quiet grace that belied the intensity of his gaze. I stood by the door, noting the faint tremble in Lady Brackenstall's fingers as she smoothed her gown. Inspector Hopkins lingered near the fireplace, his notebook in hand, his expression one of respectful deference to Holmes' lead. "Lady Brackenstall," Holmes began, his voice low and measured. "I understand this is a trying time, but your account of last night's events is vital. Pray, tell us precisely what occurred." She drew a breath, her eyes flickering to Teresa before settling on Holmes. "It was just past midnight," she said, her voice soft but steady, with a faint trace of an accent I could not place. "I could not sleep, my mind was restless. I came downstairs to the dining room, seeking a glass of wine to calm my nerves. Teresa, dear Teresa, insisted on accompanying me, as she often does when I am unwell. We were sitting there, talking quietly, when we heard a noise of scraping, like wood against stone. Before we could react, 3 men burst through the window." Her hand rose to her throat, as though the memory tightened it. They were rough, dreadful men. One had a beard, dark and matted. Another was clean-shaven, with a scar across his cheek, jagged like a lightning bolt. The third was in shadow, and I saw little of him. They spoke in harsh tones, perhaps Irish, though I cannot be certain. They demanded valuables, and when I protested, they seized the silver from the sideboard. Holmes leaned forward, his eyes never leaving her face, and Sir Eustace, When did he appear? He must have heard the commotion, she continued, her gaze dropping to her lap. He came down in his dressing gown, furious. He lunged at the scarred man, and there was a terrible scuffle. The man with the scar struck him with the poker, and Sir Eustace fell. It was over in a moment. The men tied Teresa and me with rope, took what they could carry, and fled through the window. A tear slipped down her cheek, and she brushed it away with a trembling hand. Teresa stepped closer, her expression fierce, as though daring us to doubt her mistress. Holmes, however, remained impassive, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "The wine glasses," he said abruptly. "There were 3 upon the table. You and Teresa were drinking, but who used the 3rd? Lady Brackenstall's eyes widened, a fleeting shadow crossing her face. "Sir Eustace. He joined us briefly earlier in the evening, before retiring. The glass must have been his." Holmes nodded, though his expression suggested he was far from convinced. "And the men did? They speak to one another. Did you hear a name, a phrase, anything distinct?" She shook her head, her lips pressing into a thin line. "They said little, only barked orders. I was too frightened to note more." Holmes rose, his movements fluid and deliberate. "Thank you, Lady Brackenstall. Your account is most helpful. I may need to speak with you again, but for now, rest." He turned to Teresa. "And you, madame, corroborate this entirely?" Teresa's eyes met his, unyielding. "Every word, sir. It happened just as my lady says." As we descended the staircase, Holmes' silence was heavy with thought. Once we were out of earshot, he murmured, "Her story is polished, Watson, like a rehearsed performance. The details are vivid, yet they lack the chaos of true terror. And that 3rd glasset's presence nags at me. Why leave it there, untouched, if Sir Eustace had retired hours before?" He glanced at me, his eyes glinting with the thrill of a puzzle taking shape. "There is more here than a simple burglary, and Lady Brackenstall knows it." We stepped into the chill of the hall, where the air seemed to hum with secrets. Holmes' mind, I knew, was already racing toward the truth, and I felt the familiar stir of anticipation, sensing that the tale of Abbey Grange was only beginning to unfold. Chapter 4. The grounds and the Clutha. Afternoon hung heavy over Abbey Grange, the mist curling like a living thing around the gnarled oaks and frost-bitten lawns. Sherlock Holmes, impatient to probe beyond the confines of the house, led us out into the chill, his ulster flapping as he strode toward the dining-room window. The air was sharp with the scent of damp earth and pine, and the silence of the Kentish countryside seemed to amplify the weight of the tragedy within. Inspector Stanley Hopkins trailed behind, his boots crunching on the gravel, while I kept pace with Holmes, my breath clouding in the cold. Holmes paused beneath the casement window, its warped latch still ajar from the supposed intrusion. He crouched, his keen eyes scanning the ground, which was soft and sodden from the previous night's rain. "Observe, Watson," he said, his voice low and precise. "The earth is undisturbed, no footprints, no scuffs, not even a blade of grass out of place. If 3 burglars fled through this window, they were uncommonly light-footed." He straightened, his gaze sweeping the lawn toward the distant shrubbery. "No, this was no entry point. The window's damage is a ruse, crafted to mislead." Hopkins shifted uncomfortably, his faith in the burglary narrative visibly shaken. "But the latch was forced, Mr. Holmes, and the silver is gone." Holmes' lips twitched in a faint, enigmatic smile. "Forced, yes, but from within. The scratches are too deliberate. the angle too precise for a crowbar wielded in haste. He turned abruptly, beckoning us to follow. "Come, let us see what else the grounds may tell us." We moved toward a copse of ancient youth that bordered the lawn, their dark branches forming a natural screen against the world beyond Holmes. Stride was purposeful, his eyes darting from the ground to the trees, as though reading a script invisible to the rest of us. Near the edge of the copse, where the grass gave way to a tangle of roots, he stopped abruptly, his attention caught by a faint glint in the undergrowth. With a swift movement, he knelt and retrieved a small brass key, its surface dulled by exposure but otherwise intact. He held it up, turning it in the pale light, his expression one of quiet triumph. "This is no house key," he said, slipping it into his pocket. "It is too small, too finely crafted likely for a chest or a private drawer. Its presence here is no accident." He glanced at the surrounding ground, noting a faint indentation in the soil, as though something had been briefly set down. "Someone stood here, perhaps in haste, and dropped this key. It is a thread, Watson, and we shall follow it." Hopkins frowned, his practical mind grappling with Holmes' deductions. But why here, so far from the house? Could it belong to one of the burglars? Holmes shook his head. "There were no burglars, Hopkins. The absence of footprints, the staged window, the theatrical knots on that robe all point to a deception. Born within these walls, this key, discarded in the grass, suggests a secret worth hiding, and perhaps worth killing for." He turned back toward the house, his eyes alight with the thrill of the chase. "We must learn more of Sir Eustace and his household. There is a story here, and this key may unlock its heart." As we retraced our steps, the great house loomed before us, its windows like unblinking eyes watching our progress. The key, small and unassuming, seemed to burn in Holmes' pocket, a silent promise of revelations yet to come. I felt the stir of unease, sensing that the grounds of Abbey Grange held more than clues. They held the echoes of a truth that someone had gone to great lengths to conceal. Chapter 5. The inconsistencies. The winter dusk had settled over Chislehurst by the time we left Abbey Grange, the great house receding into the mist like a ship swallowed by fog. Sherlock Holmes, Inspector Stanley Hopkins, and I took refuge at the Black Swan, a quaint inn a mile from the manor, its low-beamed ceiling and crackling fire offering a stark contrast to the chill secrets of the crime scene. We sat at a corner table, the lamplight casting long shadows across Holmes' angular features as he sipped a glass of claret, his mind clearly elsewhere. Hopkins, still reeling from the day's discoveries, fidgeted with his notebook, while I, sensing the weight of Holmes' silence, waited for him to unravel his thoughts. At length, Holmes set down his glass, his eyes glinting with the quiet fire of deduction. "The case, Hopkins, is not what it seems," he began, his voice low and deliberate. "The dining room presents a tableau of violence, yet every detail betrays artifice. Consider the rope. Its knots were loose, almost decorative, as if tied by someone with no intent to restrain. The window, forced from within, bears no external marks of entry, and the lawn, soft as it is, shows no trace of fleeing burglars. These are not the signs of a hasty crime, but of a carefully staged deception." Hopkins leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "But the silver was taken, Mr. Holmes, and Lady Brackenstall's account, her account," Holmes interrupted, "is too precise, too polished. A woman in terror does not recall the exact timbre of a stranger's accent or the precise scar on his face with such clarity. Her story is rehearsed, and Teresa's corroboration is its echo. He tapped his fingers lightly on the table. And then there are the wine glasses, 3 of them, one half filled. Yet only 2 women were supposedly present when the intruder struck. Why leave a 3rd glass untouched, unless it serves a purpose in the narrative? I frowned, piecing together his observations. You suspect someone else was in the room, Holmes. Not Sir Eustace, but another. Precisely, Watson. The 3rd glass suggests a 3rd party, someone whose presence Lady Brackenstall wishes to conceal. And the key, he drew the small brass key from his pocket, holding it to the light. This is no trifle. It was dropped in haste, far from the house, as though its owner feared its discovery. It points to a secreter chest, a drawer, perhaps containing something worth more than silver candlesticks. Hopkins shook his head, his practical mind struggling to keep pace. But who, then, if not burglars, who killed Sir Eustace? And why stage such an elaborate ruse? Holmes' gaze grew distant, as though seeing through the walls of the inn to the heart of Abbey Grange. Sir Eustace was a man of wealth and temper, Hopkins. Such men make enemies, within their homes as without. The motive lies not in theft, but in something deeper, perhaps a grievance, a betrayal, or a hidden truth guarded by that key. Lady Brackenstall's composure, her careful words, suggest she knows more than she reveals. We must look to her past, to the shadows of her life before this house. He leaned back, his fingers steepled. Tomorrow we shall return to Abbey Grange. I will speak with Teresa. Alone her loyalty to her mistress may conceal a crack through which the truth may slip, and I shall make inquiries into Sir Eustace's history. There is a thread here, gentlemen, and I mean to pull it until the whole fabric unravels. As we rose to retire, the firelight flickered across Holmes' face, illuminating the relentless curiosity that drove him. The inconsistencies of Abbey Grange were like notes in a discordant melody, and I knew Holmes would not rest until he had tuned them into harmony. The inn's warmth could not dispel the chill of the mystery, and as I climbed the creaking stairs to my room, I felt the weight of secrets yet to be unearthed, lurking in the shadows of that somber manor. Chapter 6. The Hidden Motive. The morning broke over Chislehurst with a reluctant dawn, the mist thinning to reveal the stark outlines of Abbey Grange's gables against a leaden sky. Sherlock Holmes, invigorated by the puzzle before us, was already at his work as I joined him in the Black Swan's dining room, his long fingers tracing the edge of a telegram he had received in the early hours. His eyes, sharp and restless, met mine as I entered. We returned to Abbey Grange at once, Watson, he said, folding the telegram into his pocket. There is a scent to follow, and I mean to pursue it. Inspector Stanley Hopkins joined us. As we arrived at the manor, his expression a mixture of hope and apprehension. Holmes, however, wasted no time on pleasantries, requesting a private audience with Teresa, Lady Brackenstall's maid. We were shown to a small parlour, its walls hung with faded tapestries that seemed to whisper of the house's long history. Teresa entered, her gaunt frame rigid, her dark eyes wary as they met Holmes' unflinching gaze. She stood by the door, her hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles gleamed white. "Teresa," Holmes began, his voice calm but carrying an edge of steel, "your devotion to Lady Brackenstall is evident, but it blinds you to the peril of half-truths. You were in the dining room last night. Tell me, was there a 3rd person present before Sir Eustace's death?" Her lips tightened, and for a moment I thought she would refuse to speak. Then, with a glance toward the window, as if seeking escape, she said, "I've told you what happened, sir." 3 men came through the window. They killed the master and tied us up. Holmes leaned forward, his eyes boring into hers. And the brass key I found in the copse. It belongs to a chest in your mistress's possession, does it not? A flicker of alarm crossed her face, swiftly masked. I know nothing of a key, she said, but her voice faltered. Betraying her, Holmes rose, pacing slowly before the fireplace. You are loyal, Teresa, but loyalty cannot rewrite the truth. The key unlocks something your mistress values, letters, perhaps, or documents she would risk much to protect. Sir Eustace was a cruel man, was he not? His temper was no secret. In this house, Teresa's eyes flashed, a spark of defiance breaking through her reserve. He was a brute, sir, and I'll not weep for him. He made my lady's life a misery, shouting and striking when the mood took him. But I'll say no more. Holmes nodded, as though her words confirmed a suspicion. You may go, Teresa. But know that silence protects no one when the truth is at stake. As she left, her steps quick and stiff, Holmes turned to me, his expression alight with purpose. The maid's loyalty is a wall, Watson, but it is not impenetrable. She guards her mistress's secret, and that secret is tied to the key, sir. Eustace's cruelty provides the motive, not theft, but something personal, something desperate. We stepped into the hall where Hopkins awaited. Holmes dispatched him to make inquiries in the village about Sir Eustace's reputation, while he himself examined the upper rooms, seeking the chest or drawer the key might fit. In Lady Brackenstall's boudoir, among delicate lace and silver-backed brushes, he found a small rosewood box, its lock matching the brass key perfectly. He did not open it, but his fingers lingered on the lid. This is the heart of it, Watson, he said softly. Letters, perhaps, or a record of a past she wishes to keep buried. Sir Eustace's death was no accident of burglary, it was a reckoning. As we descended to the drawing room, Holmes' mind was already racing ahead. We must learn more of Lady Brackenstall's history, he said. Her marriage to Sir Eustace was unhappy, but what drove her to such lengths? The answer lies, not in Kent, but in her past, perhaps across the seas, where her life began. His eyes gleamed with the thrill of the chase, and I knew that the hidden motive, like a shadow cast by the key, was drawing us ever closer to the truth of Abbey Grange. Chapter 7. The Australian Connection. The pale light of a Kentish afternoon filtered through the mullioned windows of Abbey Grange, casting a ghostly glow over the sombre halls as Sherlock Holmes and I returned from our morning's work. Holmes, ever restless when a case gripped him, had spent the hours since our encounter with Teresa combing the village for whispers about Sir Eustace Brackenstall. His inquiries, conducted with the subtlety of a master, had borne fruit, and as we settled in the inn's private parlour, he drew a folded paper from his coat, his eyes alight with the satisfaction of a hunter closing on his quarry. Sir Eustace was no Saint, Watson, he began, unfolding the paper-scribbled note from a local publican. His temper was notorious, his cruelties whispered about in Chislehurst's taverns, but more intriguing is his past. Before he came into his title and this estate, he spent a decade in Australia, amassing wealth through means not entirely scrupulous. It was there, in Melbourne, that he met Mary Fraser, Lady Brackenstall, young woman of considerable fortune and beauty. I leaned forward, intrigued. You suspect her past holds the key to this murder? Holmes nodded, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. Precisely. The rosewood box in her boudoir, locked with the brass key I found, likely contains letters or documents from that earlier life. Sir Eustace's death was no random act of violence, it was personal, rooted in a history that stretches across the seas. He paused, his gaze sharpening. I have wired to a contact in Melbourne, a retired inspector with a memory for old scandals. His reply should reach us by tomorrow, but already I suspect a figure from her Australian days, a man, perhaps, whose shadow looms over this crime. We returned to Abbey Grange, where Inspector Stanley Hopkins awaited, his face flushed with the results of his own inquiries. The villagers confirmed Sir Eustace was a harsh man, he reported. He quarrelled often, with servants, tenants, even his wife. Some say Lady Brackenstall lived in fear of him, though she never spoke of it openly. Holmes' eyes narrowed, and yet she remained composed when we spoke, her story too neatly tailored. Fear may have ruled her life, but it does not explain the staged burglary or the third wineglass. He turned abruptly, striding toward the dining room once more. Let us re-examine the scene, Hopkins. There is a detail we have overlooked, a thread that ties this Australian past to the present. In the dining room, Holmes moved with the precision of a conductor, his attention drawn to a small side table near the fireplace. Among the clutter of decanters and candlesticks, he found a single object out of place, a tarnished silver locket, half hidden beneath a folded napkin. He lifted it carefully, prying it open to reveal a faded photograph of a young woman, mistakably Lady Brackenstall in her youth beside a man with a strong jaw and a sailor's weathered features. This, Holmes said, holding the locket to the light, is no mere keepsake. It is a relic of a life she left behind. He pocketed the locket, his mind racing. Mary Fraser was no stranger to love before Sir Eustace, he said softly. This man, likely a suitor from her Melbourne days, may have followed her to England, or been summoned by her distress. The key, the locket, the third glass all point to a presence in that room. Someone whose connection to her past drove Sir Eustace to his death. As we left the room, the weight of Holmes' discovery settled over me. The Australian connection was no mere coincidence. It was the hinge on which this mystery turned. The locket, like the key, was a silent witness to a secret Lady Brackenstall had fought to conceal, and I felt the stir of anticipation as Holmes prepared to unravel the truth, thread by thread, across the vast distance of continents and years. Chapter 8. The man from the sea. The morning mist had burned away, leaving the Kentish countryside bathed in a pale, cold light as Sherlock Holmes and I sat in the Black Swan's parlour, awaiting the reply from his Melbourne contact. Holmes, his lean frame taut with expectation, pored over the silver locket he had found, its faded photograph a tantalizing glimpse into Lady Brackenstall's past. The fire crackled softly, casting flickering shadows across his sharp features, when a boy from the telegraph office arrived, breathless, with a message clutched in his hand. Holmes tore it open, his eyes scanning the lines with a speed that betrayed his hunger for answers. Captain Jack Croker, he said, his voice low and triumphant. A sailor, once betrothed to Mary Fraser in Melbourne, before Sir Eustace swept her into a marriage of convenience. Croker, a man of courage and temper, was seen in London only weeks ago, serving as first mate on a merchant ship, the Base Rock. The description matches a tall man, clean-shaven, with a jagged scar across his cheek. He folded the telegram, his gaze meeting mine. The scarred burglar of Lady Brackenstall's tale, Watson. There were no intruders, only Croker, drawn across the seas by a past he could not forget. I felt a jolt of realization. The third wineglass, I said. He was in the dining room with her. Holmes nodded, rising with the restless energy of a hound scenting its quarry. Exactly. The locket, the key, the staged burglary all point to Croker's presence. He came to Abbey Grange, perhaps at her summons, and Sir Eustace's death. Followed, we must confront Lady Brackenstall with this truth. We returned to the manor, where the air seemed heavier, as if the house itself sensed the unraveling of its secrets. Lady Brackenstall received us in her sitting room, her face pale but composed, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Teresa stood nearby, her eyes darting between us, a silent guardian. Holmes wasted no time, his voice cutting through the rooms. Stillness like a blade. Lady Brackenstall, he began, holding up the locket. This was found in the dining room, hidden beneath a napkin. It bears your likeness and that of Captain Jack Croker, a man you once loved in Melbourne. He is in England, is he not? He was with you the night Sir Eustace died. Her composure cracked, her eyes widening with a flash of fear. You cannot know that, she whispered, her voice trembling. You cannot prove it. Holmes stepped closer, his gaze unrelenting. The wine glasses betray you. 3 were used, yet you and Teresa were alone, you said. Croker was there, and when Sir Eustace discovered him, a struggle ensued. The poker was no burglar's, weapon it was Croker's, wielded in a moment of desperation. Lady Brackenstall's hands clenched, and for a moment I thought she would deny it further. Then her shoulders sagged, and a sob escaped her. It was not meant to happen, she said, her voice breaking. Jack heard of my sufferings, Eustace's cruelty, his rages. He came to see me, to offer escape. We were talking, just talking, when Sir Eustace burst in, drunk and furious. He attacked Jack, and Jack defended himself. It was over in an instant. Teresa stepped forward, her face fierce. Say no more, my lady. They'll twist it against you. Holmes held up a hand. We seek the truth, not persecution. Where is Croker now? Lady Brackenstall's eyes met his pleading. He sailed. Yesterday, on the base rock. He meant no harm. He only wanted to save me. Holmes nodded, his expression unreadable. Thank you, Lady Brackenstall. Your candor may yet serve you. As we left the room, I saw the weight of her confession settle over her, a mixture of relief and dread. Holmes, however, was already planning his next move, his mind racing toward the docks where a man from the sea had fled, carrying the key to Abbey Grange's darkest secret. Chapter 9. The Confession. The air in Abbey Grange's sitting room was thick with the weight of truth unveiled. The silence broken only by the faint ticking of a mantel clock and the soft rustle of Lady Brackenstall's morning gown. She sat before us, her pale face a mask of anguish, her hands twisting a lace handkerchief as though it could anchor her against the storm of her confession. Teresa stood by the door, her stern features set in a fierce loyalty, but even she could not shield her mistress from Sherlock Holmes' relentless pursuit of clarity. Inspector Stanley Hopkins lingered near the window, his notebook forgotten, his eyes wide with the dawning realization that the case was no simple burglary. Holmes leaned forward, his voice gentle yet unyielding, like a surgeon probing a wound. Lady Brackenstall, you have admitted Captain Croker's presence in the dining room. Tell us the full truth, every moment, every motive. The shadows you cast to protect him will not hold against the light of fact. Her eyes, brimming with tears, met his, and for a moment I saw the flicker of a woman torn between love and fear. Then, with a shuddering breath, she began. Captain Croker wrote to me weeks ago, having learned of my misery through A mutual friend in Melbourne. He said he was in England, that he could not bear to think of me suffering under Sir Eustace's cruelty. I begged him not to come, but he was resolute. Last night he arrived at Abbey Grange, slipping in through the garden to avoid the servants. I met him in the dining room with Teresa's help, for she has been my confidant through these wretched years. She paused, her voice faltering. We spoke of the past, of what might have been. We drank wine, yes, the third glass was his. Then Sir Eustace appeared, wild with drink and rage. He had overheard us, or perhaps suspected something, for he stormed in, shouting accusations. He seized the poker from the hearth and lunged at Jack. It was chaos. Jack pushed him back, trying to shield me, and in the struggle, he struck Sir Eustace. The blow was sudden, final. Sir Eustace fell, and we stood frozen, knowing what it meant. Teresa interjected, her voice sharp. It was no murder, sir. It was defense. Sir Eustace would have killed him, or my lady, had Jack not acted. Holmes nodded, his expression impassive. And the burglary, the broken window, the stolen silver. Lady Brackenstall's gaze dropped to her hands. My idea, and Teresa's. We could not let Jack be taken for murder. We broke the window. From inside, scattered the silver, and tied ourselves loosely to make it seem as though intruders had come and gone. The locket, I must have dropped it in my panic. Jack fled to his ship, the Base Rock, vowing to sail for America and never return. Holmes rose, pacing slowly before the fireplace, his silhouette stark against the flickering flames. You have risked much to shield him, Lady Brackenstall. But the truth is, a stern master-writ will not be buried. Where is Croker now, precisely? He sailed at dawn, she whispered, a tear slipping down her cheek. The Base Rock was bound for New York. He is gone, and I am left to bear this alone. Holmes' eyes softened, though his resolve did not waver. You have borne enough. Madame, your candour may yet shape what follows. He turned to Hopkins, who stood speechless, the weight of the confession settling over him. We must verify her story, Hopkins. A telegram to the Southampton docks will confirm the Bass Rock's departure. But I suspect her account is true. Every detail fits the scene we found. As we left the room, Lady Brackenstall's quiet sobs followed us, a sound of both relief and despair. Holmes' face was unreadable, but I knew his mind was already racing toward the next step, weighing the delicate balance between justice and mercy. The confession had laid bare the heart of Abbey Grange's tragedy, but the shadow of Captain Croker, the man from the sea, still lingered, a fugitive bound for a distant shore. Chapter 10. The pursuit. The revelation of Lady Brackenstall's confession hung over us like a storm cloud as Sherlock Holmes, Inspector Stanley Hopkins, and I hastened from Abbey Grange, the manor's sombre silhouette fading into the Kentish dusk. Holmes' face was set with a fierce determination, his eyes alight with the urgency of the chase. We must reach Southampton before the Bass Rock sails, he said, his voice cutting through the chill evening air. Captain Croker is the keystone of this tragedy, and we cannot let him slip beyond our grasp. A telegram to the Southampton port authorities, dispatched from the Black Swan, confirmed that the Base Rock had not yet departed, delayed by a minor repair to its rigging. Holmes seized the opportunity, and within the hour we were aboard a fast train rattling through the darkening countryside, the rhythm of the wheels echoing the pulse of our mission. Hopkins, clutching his notebook, looked to Holmes with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. "Do you mean to arrest Croker, Mr. Holmes?" he asked. "Lady Brackenstall's story paints him as no cold-blooded killer." Holmes' gaze remained fixed on the window, where the last light of day glinted off frost-covered fields. The law is a blunt instrument. Hopkins, our task is to uncover the truth, not to bind it in chains. Croker's actions demand scrutiny, but so too does the context of Sir Eustace's tyranny. We shall see what he has to say. We arrived at Southampton as twilight deepened into night, the docks a maze of shadowed cranes and swaying lanterns. The Base Rock, a sturdy merchant vessel, loomed at its berth, its crew bustling with final preparations. Holmes led the way, his ulster flapping like a dark banner as he strode up the gangway. A burly quartermaster barred our path, but Hopkins' badge and Holmes' commanding presence secured us passage to the captain's quarters, where we found Jack Croker. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered and weathered, with a face that bore the marks of a life at sea. A jagged scar ran across his cheek, stark against his tanned skin, and his eyes, though steady, held a flicker of haunted resolve. He rose as we entered, his posture wary but not defiant. "You're here about Abbey Grange," he said, his voice low and rough. I knew this day would come. Holmes studied him, his gaze piercing. "Captain Croker, you stand accused of killing Sir Eustace Brackenstall. Lady Brackenstall has confessed to your presence in the dining room. Speak plainly, why did you come to Abbey Grange, and what happened there?" Croker's jaw tightened, but he met Holmes' eyes without flinching. "I loved merry Lady Brackenstall years ago in Melbourne. When I heard of her suffering, I couldn't stay away. I went to offer her freedom, to take her from that brute. We met in secret, but Sir Eustace found us. He was drunk, raging, and came at me with a poker. I fought to protect her, and in the struggle, I struck him. I didn't mean to kill him, was a moment's act, born of fear for her life." Holmes nodded, his expression unreadable. "And the burglary, the broken window." "Mary's plan, to shield me. She and Teresa staged it after I fled. I begged her to come with me, but she refused, knowing it would damn us both." His voice broke, and he looked away, toward the dark sea beyond the porthole. "I sailed, to put an ocean between us and this nightmare." Hopkins shifted, his hand twitching toward his handcuffs, but Holmes raised a hand to stay him. "Captain Croker, you have admitted to a grave act. Yet Sir Eustace was a man whose cruelty invited retribution. Return with us to London, and let the truth decide your fate." Croker's eyes hardened, but he nodded. "I'll face what comes, for Mary's sake." As we escorted him from the ship, the docks silent, save for the creak of rigging and the lap of waves, I sensed the weight of Holmes' unspoken calculations. The pursuit had ended, but the path ahead between justice and compassion remained fraught with shadows, as murky as the waters that stretched toward the horizon. Chapter 11. The Moral Dilemma. The journey back to London was a somber affair. The train's steady clatter a counterpoint to the heavy silence that enveloped our small party. Sherlock Holmes sat opposite Captain Jack Croker, whose scarred face bore the weight of a man resigned to his fate, while Inspector Stanley Hopkins, ever dutiful, kept a wary eye on our charge. I watched Holmes closely, noting the furrow in his brow, the subtle interplay of resolve and doubt in his sharp eyes. The capture of Croker had resolved the mechanics of the crime, but a deeper question lingered, one that Holmes now wrestled with in the quiet of his mind. We arrived at Baker Street as the city's lamps flickered to life, casting a golden glow through the fog. In our familiar lodgings, Holmes lit a pipe and settled into his armchair, motioning for Croker to sit. Hopkins and I took our places by the fire. the crackle of coals filling the pause as Holmes regarded the sailor with a penetrating gaze. "Captain Croker," he began, his voice low and deliberate, "you have confessed to killing Sir Eustace Brackenstall, yet your account, corroborated by Lady Brackenstall, paints a picture not of malice, but of a desperate act to protect a woman from a tyrant. Tell me, what would you have me do with you?" Croker's hands, rough from years at sea, clenched briefly. "I'll face the law, Mr. Holmes. I struck the blow, and I'll not run from it. But I beg you spare Mary. She acted only to shield me, out of love and fear." Holmes leaned back, exhaling a thin stream of smoke. "The law, Captain, is a machine, blind to the nuances of human suffering. Sir Eustace was a man whose cruelty left scars deeper than the one you bear. His death, though tragic, freed Lady Brackenstall from a prison of his making. Yet the law would see you hang, and her name dragged through scandal." Hopkins stirred, his sense of duty bristling. "Mr. Holmes, the evidence is clear. Croker killed a man, and the law must take its course. We cannot simply let him walk free." Holmes' eyes flicked to Hopkins, a spark of impatience in their depths. "And what of justice, Inspector? Is it served by punishing a man who acted to save a life, while the true villain lies dead by his own provocation?" He turned to me, his voice softening. "Watson, you have seen the marks of Sir Eustace's cruelty in Lady Brackenstall's eyes, in Teresa's fierce loyalty. What say you?" I hesitated, torn between the clarity of the law and the murkier truth of the heart. "Croker's act was not murder in the cold sense," I said at length, "but justice must weigh the deed against the man's intent. He acted to protect, not to destroy." Holmes nodded, his gaze returning to Croker. "You are a man of honor, Captain, bound by love and duty. I propose a course that serves justice, if not the letter of the law. Return to the base rock, sail for America, and never set foot in England again. Your exile will be punishment enough, and Lady Brackenstall will be spared further pain." Croker's eyes widened, a flicker of hope breaking through his stoic mask. "You'd let me go, knowing what I've done." Holmes' expression was unreadable, but his voice held a quiet conviction. "I am not the law, Captain. I am its conscience. Go and live a life that redeems this act." Hopkins protested, but Holmes silenced him with a raised hand. "File your report, Hopkins, as an unsolved burglary. The silver is gone, the window broken. Let that be the story. Justice, in this case, lies beyond the gallows." As Croker rose, his gratitude unspoken but palpable, I felt the weight of Holmes' decision settle over the room. The moral dilemma of Abbey Grange had been resolved not by statute, but by a compassion tempered with reason, a choice that left the law behind in favor of a deeper truth. Chapter 12. The return to Baker Street. The fog had lifted from London streets as Sherlock Holmes and I returned to our familiar lodgings at 221B Baker Street, the gas lamps casting a warm, amber glow through the windows. The journey from Southampton had been one of quiet reflection, the weight of Captain Croker's departure and Holmes' unconventional resolution settling over us like a mantle. Inspector Stanley Hopkins had parted ways at the station, his face a study in conflicted duty, his report destined to record the tragedy at Abbey Grange as an unsolved burglary. I sensed in Holmes a rare pensiveness, as though the case had stirred something deeper than the usual thrill of unraveling a mystery. We settled by the fire. The familiar clutter of our sitting-room chemical apparatus, scattered papers, and the lingering scent of shag tobacco offering a comforting contrast to the sombre halls of Abbey Grange. Holmes lit his pipe, the curls of smoke rising like spectres as he gazed into the flames. I poured us each a brandy, sensing that the moment called for more than silence. "You took a great risk, Holmes," I ventured, settling into my chair. "Letting Croker go free could have consequences, should the truth ever surface." Holmes' eyes flicked to me, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "The truth, Watson, is a slippery thing, often at odds with the machinery of the law. Sir Eustace Brackenstall was a tyrant, his death a release for a woman bound by fear. Croker's act, though fatal, was born of necessity, not malice. To see him hang would serve no justice, only vengeance for a man who deserved little mourning." I sipped my brandy, the warmth of it steadying my thoughts. Yet the law would not see it so. Hopkins was right to protest you've placed him in a difficult position. Holmes waved a hand, dismissing the concern. "Hopkins is a man of principle, but he trusts my judgment. The stolen silver and broken window will satisfy Scotland Yard's need for a tidy conclusion. As for Croker and Lady Brackenstall, they have been given a chance to rebuild beyond the shadow of this tragedy. Exile is its own punishment, Watson, and a far heavier one than a fleeting trial." He leaned back, his pipe glowing softly in the dim light. "There are cases, my dear friend, where the heart's justice outweighs the statute book. Abbey Grange was such a case. We have not betrayed the truth, we have honored it in its fullest measure." I nodded, struck by the quiet conviction in his voice. Holmes, for all his analytical brilliance, had a vein of compassion that ran deep, surfacing in moments like these when human frailty demanded more than logic alone could provide. The fire crackled, and for a time we sat in companionable silence, the weight of the case lifting like the fog outside. As I rose to retire, Holmes' voice stopped me. "Write this one down, Watson," he said, his eyes glinting with a rare warmth. "Not for the public, perhaps, but for yourself. A reminder that even in the darkest mysteries, there is room for mercy." I smiled, knowing I would indeed set pen to paper, preserving the adventure of Abbey Grange as a testament to Holmes' singular blend of reason and humanity. The case was closed, its secrets safe across the sea, and Baker Street, as ever, stood, ready for the next challenge to come knocking at our door. The end.